All right, so our next topic is music, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. Swade, what do you have for us first?
I've got a song that I've been jamming like crazy. It's Time Alone with You by Jacob Collier, featuring Daniel Caesar, I believe. And it's crazy. The only way I can describe this song. Crazy. Yeah, the only way I can describe it is crazy. Musically, it is like it's insane. I don't know if you guys know who Jacob Collier is, but he's a composer, piano player, bass player, guitar player, singer, drummer, trumpet player. I mean, he plays every instrument. He's a composer. I think he's 23, maybe, and he has. This past year, he just won 2 Grammys. This last year, he's 23 for composition on a couple of songs. But his last album, Jess, DJESSE, Jess Volume 2, I think, was brilliant. And he had all these great, super difficult and intricate, like jazz contemporary pieces. And then he just put this song out with Daniel Caesar, and it's a straight up R&B funk song that is harmonically incredible. Like the harmonic sounds that he gets are crazy. Just the way he makes his vocals and stuff, and just go listen. It's one song, and it's I think 6 minutes long, but you'll freak out. You'll freak out because it's so insane. I sent it to a buddy of mine that's a musician and producer, and he texted me back and said, "What in the world was that?" I said, "It's Jacob Collier, man." And then he called me, and he sat there with me for an hour and just could not stop talking about it. I mean, it's just a really impressive song. Yeah, you like it too?
What kind of genre would you, or like you already said the genre, what artist would you compare it to if you could?
It's some weird space between Stevie Wonder and like I want to say Miles Davis, like John Coltrane jazz with a little bit of Michael Jackson in it. I mean, it's just a masterpiece of music. It's intense. I mean, once you're done with it, you're definitely going to sit there and have a second to breathe. But it's great. I mean, it's really good. And then that and because it's only one song, so I can't talk about it super long. That and Rock With You by Dirty Loops is another one that I've been to.
I love that band.
Yeah, Dirty Loops is great. They just put out Rock With You, which is wild. Yeah. But I think of the two, I would just tell everybody to listen to Time Alone With You by Jacob Collier. I mean, I'm hearing it in my head now, and I wish even singing it would do it justice for you guys, but it's such a thick and technical song. You'll love it. Just go listen to it. You'll love it.
Kind of reminds me, or I'm starting to think of like Snarky Puppy or Ghost Note, bands like that.
It's very similar. Yeah, like how Snarky Puppy, they did that song with Layla Hathaway, right? Something in common. That.
Yeah.
They it's similar to that in like that R&B kind of funk thing, or like that R&B jazz.
Yeah,
but
jazz.
But it's got a lot of funk to it. Like it's got a lot of like.
Okay.
It's like just real groovy. Just listen to it. Yeah, it'll turn your ear upside down for a little while. It's pretty good.
Okay. So does Jacob Collier himself, like he records all the parts and then just edits it together himself?
Yeah,
like he does everything?
I believe he's the lead producer on it. So also in that song, most of the instrumentation in that song is harmonies. And it's harmonies, drums, a little bit of bass, and like sort of like old school keys, like Stevie Wonder style keys. But it's mostly just harmonies. I mean, it's mostly him singing harmonies all up and down the board, which is super cool. I mean, some of the harmonies are 7 and 8 part harmonies that he sings, and it's insane. Like, just sit down and listen to it; it'll freak you out.
Definitely will at this point. You've sold it. You sold it to me.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to check it out too. I actually have a whole album, but it's been out for quite some time now. It's actually been out for 15 years now. Wow. It was released in 2005. And it is From Under the Cork Tree by Fall Out Boy. Yeah. So, I mean, it's a nostalgic thing. I fell victim to the whole Facebook board in quarantine thing, and it's a 10-day album challenge, and that was actually my album for today.
See, I've actually thought about doing that challenge, but just doing all 10 in one post to like say people.
Yeah, honestly, because I have all 10 ready to go, but I'm like, well, shoot, if I want to do one a day, I can't just do 10 in one day. That's not how the challenge works. You got to abide by the rules. You got to do it right.
Every day you should post, every single day you should post From Under the Cork Tree.
Yeah, and then post different variations of it. I'll be like, all right, here's the regular version, deluxe, live, so on and so forth. Here's the 8-track version of it.
Yeah. Here's it on vinyl.
But no,
here's each single individually.
Right.
Yeah, all the singles are released off the album, but in the correct order of what the album would be in order of. So, but no, it's one of my favorite albums because obviously Sugar We're Going Down's on it. That's like the top hit. It's got Dance Gavin Dance, or not Dance Gavin Dance, just Dance Dance. But they're a good band too. We'll talk about them later. But Dance Dance is one of my favorite songs because that was like the first bass riff I ever learned how to play. So I really enjoyed that.
Fun fact, that was the first music video I watched on YouTube. Dance Dance.
Really? Like period, not just of Fall Out Boy, just period?
I don't know if it was Fall Out Boy in general, but I mean, that's just like that song sticks with me to this day because when YouTube first came out, around 2005, nobody really knew what to do with it. So a lot of people were dumping music videos on there, and that video had come out around that time, and that was the first music video I watched, and I was just blown away.
Yeah, because 2005, that was kind of the early beginnings of YouTube where it started to emerge and whatnot.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think this album just overall has it has good dynamic to it. The first, 4 tracks really hit you hard. And you're like, dang, this is like good stuff. And then you kind of get to more of the middle album where it's like, I've Got a Dark Alley and A Bad Idea and 7 Minutes in Heaven, Sophomore Slump. That's kind of where it starts to get more quote unquote emo because you're like, oh, this is like the lyrics are actually kind of heavy. Like you're like, whoa, this is like some good material that they're sitting on. And then it ends up. Do what?
I was going to ask, isn't Otto Von Halen on that one? Isn't that on that album?
Yeah, actually it is. And I like that one as well because that's in the parentheses for 7 Minutes in Heaven.
Yeah.
I love that track as well. It's a really good one, a very underrated song. And I think because they just made an album that it for some reason, well, there is a reason, is that they focus on Sugar We're Going Down because it's an amazing track. But I'm saying there's so many tracks that for sure if you had like not written Sugar We're Going Down, there's so many honorable mentions in place where you've been like, okay, that easily could have been a top track. That could have been one too. Me personally, A Little Less 16 Candles for me would have been one of the top ones. Like had Sugar We're Going Down not been invented, that would have been a big one for me. It was just like hit after hit after hit. So yeah, it's just a good album. I don't know what else to say. It's that easy.
What's interesting about that album was when Fall Out Boy, they put out, those EPs before when they were still local, and then they put out their first album, Take This to Your Grave. That was kind of their way of saying, this is who we are, and there's like no expectations at the time of who they are. And this is like 2003. But then when they put out From Under the Cork Tree, they had a little bit more pressure because this was their second album commercially. And at that time, there was a lot more producers, managers, and labels involved in the whole process. And so you can tell between Take This to Your Grave and From Under the Cork Tree, the kind of change and the evolution that they had to go through to make that album happen. And then also, based on those singles that you're talking about, those hits, those were the ones that got them on the map, basically, that basically introduced them to the entire mainstream music industry right there. And so like that was a big deal for them because that's the one that put them on the map and basically had to strive for commercial success. Otherwise, because if this album was not made, who knows if they would have achieved the success that they did at that time. But that album was so pivotal for them. That's just something that I always think about when I listen to it because I'm like, you know, people that know Fall Out Boy think of that album and don't realize that Take This to Your Grave came out before that, and it's completely different approach to the same kind of concept. But they were able to take this second album, refine it, and then give it commercial success based off those singles and music videos and things that completely changed their career.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, with any good band, the second album I feel like it really make or break because it's like it's easy enough to write your first album because it's like you're sitting on a bunch of good ideas and it's like, all right, we got all this, and obviously your first album should be what you really put your heart into, but it's like, okay, well now what? You know, if you really want to top it and keep going as a band, you can't just let it die out. And I think a good example for me personally is like Imagine Dragons, because I don't think they're ever going to write an album as good as their first album because it seemed like to me they put their best ideas into it. And so now I'm like, I feel like they kind of fizzled out in a way because like now it's like, well, you put everything into that one album, which isn't a bad thing because that album's incredible, but it's like you're not progressing as a band if you're only having maybe one hit on every album from now on. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, you need to try something different because you're not progressing as a band. So right. I just kind of how I feel about it. But yeah, but Fall Out Boy is different because that was the beginning of many great albums to come. Mm-hmm. And that From Under a Cork Tree definitely started that trend for him, and it was just it's phenomenal.
I was just re-listening to it the other day.
Wow.
Great minds think alike.
I listened to that in Infinity on High, which I love that album. I think Infinity on High is probably my favorite of their albums. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think my favorite track on From Under the Cork Tree is XO.
Mm-hmm. The final track on the album.
Oh my gosh, it closes it so well.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I love From Under the Cork Tree because toward the end of the album, it slowly leans into the style that they come into Infinity on High with.
Right.
Because it's a change in feel
mm-hmm.
from like the old Takes to Your Grave stuff,
mm-hmm.
where they were heavier.
Yeah.
They were just heavier as a band. Everything was punchy and driven, and then in Front of the Cork Tree, they got really intricate with their stuff. Like I've got a dark alley and a bad idea that says you should shut your mouth.
Yep.
The opening of that song and the melody to it's not a hard rock melody. It's not like a punk rock melody or a punk rock sound.
No, yeah, it's very soft.
Yeah, and then they lean toward the end of the album toward that kind of funky rock,
mm-hmm.
that like sort of funk rock that they come into Infinity on High with, like I'm Like a Lawyer.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Infinity on High. It's like a funk song. It's
right.
A little bit like a funk thing, and then of course Patrick Stump puts out Soul Punk as an album, so it's like they really have a lot of rooting in that. I feel like they never really used it in Take This to Your Grave. They slowly leaned into it. So I love Front of the Cork Tree because you can feel them changing.
Yeah.
You can feel them growing as a band. It's really cool. Great album.
Absolutely. It's tough. It's funny you brought up Infinity on High because I was debating on whether I was going to put Infinity on High or From Under a Cork Tree on my challenge. And it did boil down to the end of the albums because I was like, both of them start off just, high energy, high dynamics. But I was like, which one really ended with a bang? And it really was because of XO. I was like that. I mean, to end with that, I was like, that was perfect.
The end of Infinity on High is I've got all this ringing in my ears, right?
Yeah, and I'm not personally a fan of that one. I mean, it's a good song, don't get me wrong, but I'd take XO over that for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, it's like comparing a green apple to red apples. They're both apples. They're both great. gonna eat them at the end of the day, but it's just personal preference at that point.
The way I look at it, especially with Fall Out Boy and their whole career and their evolution, Take This to Your Grave was, them experimenting with who they were and saying, okay, this is who we want to be. And then taking that concept from under the court tree and, refining that and then thinking about what does this sound like commercially? What can people latch onto here? And then from there, they gained some success, got some ears on it. And then that's when Infinity on High is what blew them up. Not only was it, a bigger album, there was bigger songs on it, there was bigger production, and it really showed the entire world who Fall Out Boy was beyond just the rock industry. And I know we're talking about From Under the Court Tree, but if you didn't have From Under the Court Tree, you wouldn't have Infinity on High, because that was the transitional album between the more, like you were saying, the loose punk rock Take This to Your Grave album, and then the high produced, massive, mainstream, whatever you want to call it, Infinity on High album. So you have this transitional piece in the middle that links the two together in a wonderful way, where you see the journey, but you can't have one or the other without that middle piece. And it's such a pivotal album, like I was saying, for their career, but also just as you listen through their catalog, that's the album that sticks out to me, because I'm like, man, they never do anything like this ever again, because what they did before and what they did after are so, different. And the way they went after that album completely took many different turns, and everything they were doing before that album was so many different things. And so when you kind of think about it, it was that pivot into their career as we know it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. Well, we could talk all day about them, so let's quit bragging on them. They get it. They know they're good.
A separate show later on of just Fall Out Boy, and that will be good.
We can literally donate a whole episode to them and talk about them all day. So,
all right. So, my album that I'd like to talk about is a band called Asking Alexandria. They're a band from the UK, I believe, or a majority of them are from the UK. Their latest album that just came out maybe a week ago, Like a House on Fire. So this album is really interesting to me because, and just a little backstory on the band, they started out into the scene as a metalcore, hard rock type band, very melodic, but then at the same time, super heavy and super chuggy with their guitars. And so what happened was, at the beginning of their career, they started to kind of set a lot of these stereotypical tropes that you would see happening back in, the late 2000s and early 2010s. And so what happened with them is they just became very, they became like a parody of themselves for a while, because it didn't seem like they were trying to innovate as much with the sound, which is fine for bands to do that, but each album started to sound the same, and they started to recycle a lot of the same ideas. And so back then I viewed them as such a different band, and something that I wasn't necessarily engaged with when they started releasing music. It's more of a band that me and friends would make fun of for various reasons. But what happened was, within the past maybe two or three albums, the album before, or two albums before this most recent one, was kind of that pivot moment for them. And I would say the album before this one really defined who they were in a new way. It was a refresh of the band, the brand, and everything that they've been doing up until that point. Because for a while, I think they'd lost their singer, Danny Worsnop, had a different one for a while, and then got back into the game with him after he did some solo stuff. So they kind of had a break in between this late 2000, early 2010 sound to late 2010 sound. And the past two releases have been incredible. And this most recent release, really stepped up their game for the last, because the last album they put out really got my attention after all these years. And that was the funny thing. Like, I was like, this band that I used to kind of look at in a weird way and kind of make fun of has really been working hard since they took a break and came back with something big, powerful, and something a little bit more accessible for a wider audience, something a little bit more hard rock, a little bit more familiar as far as like song structure and instrumentation, and then some really catchy choruses. And when that album came out, I was like, man, Danny Worsnop can sing. Because a lot of the earlier stuff, he was screaming, and a great screamer, but at the same time, the vocals were just not there. But since he had some time to kind of, exercise those vocals on solo acts and other projects, these most recent albums have just been amazing. And I would highly suggest you go back and kind of see the evolution that this band has gone through. But this is one of those albums, this most recent one, they've completely, in the words of Dumb and Dumber, totally redeemed themselves. So just a couple of highlights. The lead singles that really stood out to me was their first one they dropped, called The Violence. This one completely was like a palate cleanser to the last album, in a way where they brought in new elements of production that you didn't necessarily hear on the last album, but they like kind of added on top of what you had heard previously. So that was a really interesting lead single, because it got you kind of a little taste of what this album would be. And this was released maybe over a year ago. So it had been a while since they had put out another album since their last one. The second single was They Don't Want What We Want and They Don't Care, in parentheses. That's a really, really great, catchy song. I love the chorus, and I love the driving beat that kind of takes you there. Another one was Anti-Socialist. That's a great single. Definitely, like I said, I keep going back to the melodies, because he really stepped up his game and showed you what his vocals were capable of, whether it was unclean vocals or his, full voice. Some other great singles to check out: Down to Hell, House on Fire, which is the title track, or sort of like the title track here. All great singles that kind of encompass what you were getting. But from that, from these hard rock tracks, you had a couple of key non-singles that really stood out to me. One of them was a kind of like a pop power ballad in the way of like maybe Linkin Park's Heavy, where they actually featured a female vocalist. And so it has this really interesting, bouncy pop beat over a little bit more darker vibe that really shows them in a different light. It's like something you've never really heard from them before. And I thought that was really interesting to kind of dive into, and an interesting concept. And then I mentioned Danny had his own solo project, and a lot of that, one of it was like, one of the albums he put out was a country album, which he brought a lot of that influence into this one specifically. And then he recently had done some R&B and soul albums, or little EPs. And also a lot of that was brought into this album. So you have this mashup of all these different influences that they kind of took and applied it to the new version of themselves. So another example of that was All Due Respect, R&B soul influence, and the vocals on that one are just incredible. Lots of vocal runs and ad-libbing, which is something they haven't really done before. Thought that was really neat. And then finally, One Turns to None, which is just like a massive rock anthem. And it has a massive hook to it. It reminded me of like a Fall Out Boy song off of their American Beauty album. It just has this big stadium feel to it. At least like when I'm listening to it and I close my eyes, like my mind immediately takes me to like a giant stadium somewhere. But definitely check out those songs as well as the first singles that I mentioned. But overall, this has to be my favorite album from this band since they've started. And it has made me look at them in a completely different way. And I cannot wait to hear what they are doing next. and hopefully would love to see them live and playing these songs. So yeah, Asking Alexandria, Like a House on Fire. Definitely check that out. Do y'all have any thoughts on the band or what you know of this album?
I never really listened to Asking Alexandria a whole lot until what was their not this most recent album, the album before Alone in a Room. Is that what it was?
Yeah.
That's the one that definitely caught my attention. Before that, like so I was just kind of like, oh, like I know they're a band, but I'm really, I get what they're about, but it just seemed kind of basic to me. I was like, okay,
yeah,
whatever. But that album really caught my attention, so they got me excited, and so hearing you describe this new one, I'm like, okay, well they've definitely stepped up their game, and seems like they're taking like kind of a more I don't know, a different type of approach to their songwriting. So yeah, I'm excited to check them out now.
Compared to their stuff in the past, it's a more commercial rock sound, but it totally worked for who they are and who they used to be. Like I said, a couple albums before this, they released The Black, which is the first album with Danny back that was the last one they did with him. And then hearing that kind of influenced the next one, which is the one that had Alone in the Room on it. And then hearing that one influence this, I feel like this album is what they had been building towards.
I never really dove into Asking Alexandria, any of their stuff, but I do remember the other day you were telling me about this album a little bit. You were just recommending it to me, and I haven't had a chance to sit down with it. So after hearing you talk about it, I'll have to sit down and get off of Jacob Collier and listen to Asking Alexandria on the other side of the spectrum entirely.
Yeah. I mean, it's just good rock music. I mean, in a world now where rock music is kind of in the back seat for now, in other underground genres, like EDM and hip hop and things are kind of getting their rock star status in the popular music space. I feel like this kind of stuff is what will continue. And we kind of touched on this topic a little bit in episode 1. We talked about the band Picturesque, which I think you might be familiar with a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But the kinds of things that they did on their most recent album to keep rock music kind of innovative and keeping the genre moving forward. This is a band that is really thinking about that and saying, what can we bring to the table that you may have never heard before, or something that you are maybe familiar with, and kind of turning it on its head and being innovative with it.
Yeah, hopefully.